Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ron Kovach, and I'm the Executive Director of AIAA. That's the American International Accreditation Association of Schools and Colleges. And we're very pleased to be partnering today with our friends at Edmentum. And having with us, we're very honored to have an expert, Jen Perry, with the Whole Learner Framework, and I'll introduce Jen in a second. Also with us is Paul Montague, and Paul is from Edmentum, as I mentioned, one of our partners. And Paul, I'm sure that you will be presenting, or at least talking very briefly about who Edmentum is and how you're in this educational field as one of our partners. For those of you who are not familiar with AIAASC, or AIA for short, we accredit schools and colleges across the world. We're in 11 different countries, and we're in the accreditation process business, but also in the teaching and learning resource field to provide our teachers and administrators in our schools with the tools and skills and the services, such as presenting this particular webinar today. And so we're very pleased to be presenting Jen Perry, who is a Whole Learner Framework expert. And this is a very important topic, as Jen certainly will go into, because social and emotional learning is an integral part of human development. And this is true for both young people as well as for adults, because some of the benefits of SEL, or social emotional learning, is that it leads to improved academic success and behaviors, that it helps improve lifetime outcomes. So there's this lifelong benefit. It contributes to safe, healthy, and just communities. It increases teacher retention. And most importantly, I think, is that it models for students what healthy emotional behaviors are. And this is certainly a big role that teachers can play. So Jen Perry joined Edmentum as the learning designer for social emotional learning. After 30 years of working in the educational field as a teacher, as an administrator, and I'm sure that we will see her passion for social emotional learning and the importance to build trauma-informed responses and systems. So her work has included supporting youth and administrators and schools in understanding behavior and implementing transformational change through strength-based approaches. So it certainly is my pleasure to present Jen Perry. Thank you, Jen.
Oh, thank you, Ron. I know that you did mention that you wanted Paul to do an overview. Paul, were you thinking you wanted to start with that before I jump into things, or how do you want to manage that?
No, the most important thing, Jen, is for you to get stuck in. Everybody's here to listen to you, not me.
Okay, all right. Well, we will get right into it. Let me bear with me 1 second here while I share my screen for everybody. I'm so excited that you are all here. We will get up and running right away. Okay. And Paul is going to help me manage chat and any questions. We have a little bit of time set aside for that. So thank you guys for joining me today. And thank you so much, Ron, for the lovely introduction. I'm here to talk about unpacking what a whole learner model is and how we connect that to classroom practices, particularly through the lens of social and emotional learning. And so you've learned a little bit about me, and I'm sure that we'll be sharing the slide deck with you so you can get some of the different links that we have. So I want to start out by asking, what is your why for today? Why did you decide that this was the workshop at 10 o'clock at night for some of you that you wanted to join? If you could just pop a few of those whys into chat. What's going on for you? What prompted it? What are you excited about? Paul's going to track that for us as we keep going. In the meantime, while you're writing that, I just want to talk about why we're here from a sort of logistical perspective. It's not necessarily your why, but certainly the why behind the conversation of social and emotional learning and wellness. There are a number of initiatives around well-being. And internationally, there are things like OECD's Learning Compass and the Dubai Wellness Census, and you can see some images of those there. And these align really nicely to the 5 social and emotional learning competencies that we're going to talk about briefly today, highlighted internationally by the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, or CASEL. In particular, highlighting social emotional skills in childhood have a great impact on long-term effects in adult life. And Ron highlighted that a bit for us in his introduction. The focus on social and emotional learning can support 21st century workforce readiness skills. They can build connection, improving academic outcomes, and help support mental health needs that have only increased with the pandemic. And also, brain science is helping us understand the pedagogy of how we learn is shifting. Recognizing the role of emotions is essential in making learning sticky. And we're going to talk a little more about that later. So, when we talk about social and emotional learning, some of the things that will be familiar to you are the concepts of emotional well-being, of psychological well-being, or this drive for autonomy and problem solving, resilience, attentiveness and involvement, and social well-being. That's our relational skills, intra and interpersonal. All right. So that's some of it. Paul, have you pulled a few things out of our?
I have, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a range of great responses. So social emotional learning is relatively new to some of our colleagues that have joined us. Some want to look at how we can use social emotional learning to support special educational needs children. They want to explore and learn more about social emotional learning in general. They're interested in the holistic view of education and social emotional learning's importance in that. The effects of the pandemic, it's a once in a lifetime experience that learners have been through, and how can we support with that? And behavior is the key to academics, so that they want to learn about more about how we can support and improve behavior, and social emotional learning is an intrinsic part of that.
Great, thank you so much. And I think we're going to address most of those as we talk today. And so if people have questions or feel like maybe their why wasn't touched on as we move through it, please feel free at the end to bring those questions back up. But certainly, the concerns around that pandemic have really heightened our understanding, though, that SEL is for everyone. And, we've sort of always needed it, but this has really been a time of learning around that. So the agenda for today is to just talk a bit about that whole learner model. And people, Paul highlighted that you guys talked about the holistic piece. We're going to just level set around what is social and emotional learning, and how social and emotional learning and academic success really go together. And then we're going to talk about some really concrete approaches for your classroom and how Edmentum can help. So hopefully that will tick some of your boxes. So let's start with this concept of the whole learner model. And at Edmentum, we have this tree as our whole learner model. And we believe that the whole learner is rooted in basic needs, right? So that we know at a very basic level, those are sort of the Maslow hierarchy of needs, that food, shelter, safety, all of those things have to be in place for kids, for all of us to be optimal in terms of our brain use. That whole learners are nurtured by relationships, right? That those are pivotal in our learning experience and in our ability to be successful. That whole learners flourish with the support of executive function and social emotional learning. And so executive function are the working memory, cognitive flexibility, inhibitory control. That's really at the root of our ability to be attentive and to learn and function. And then finally, a whole learner is nourished by proven academic programs that ensure successful outcomes for students. And I know you guys are already experts around that. So, excuse me, I apologize. As research around the brain has evolved, it's clear that learning happens more effectively when all parts of a person's needs are addressed. Learners need to be safe and fed in order to focus. They need to feel connected with individualized understandings of their needs. Executive function and social emotional learning lay the foundation for focus, memory, goal setting, self-awareness, and organizational skills that really form a foundation for academic success. And today we're going to be talking about social and emotional learning and how it can support learning success and ways to integrate that explicitly. So let's start with what is social and emotional learning. So what I'd love for you to do is to use your chat feature again, and Paul's going to read that and tell us what you think social and emotional learning is. What's the first thing that pops into your mind? And you can see here, you know, some people for a long time have thought it's the warm fuzzy, you know, high five, give kids a hug, like create that high touch environment. And other folks have seen it as something where you can maybe not have consequences, or maybe you're upskilling kids for you know, behavioral needs in your school. What are some of the things? Okay, so I see someone says emotional intelligence. Yep, emotions at the root of that. Great. So I'll just give folks a minute. Yeah, lots of emotion pieces. Transferring what we take inside the classroom into reality, right? So being able to use those skills, interactivity, the difference from right and wrong behaviors. Great. Different modalities for expressing emotions. Someone there has the 5 CASTLE competencies. We've got a plant there. Self-control. Great. Well, thank you. So for a long time now, schools have seen social and emotional learning as a nice to have, but not necessarily a need to have. The most common understandings of social and emotional learning have been along the lines of creating a warm, fuzzy environment where there might be a perceived lack of consequence, or on the other end of the spectrum as a way to help students struggling with behavior meet the norms of their environments. I love that connection before correction. Thank you for popping that in. Often social and emotional learning is simply seen as soft skills. Many character education programs use aspirational figures who've had some sort of adversity in their life, extorting, if I can do it, you can do it. Be kind, be nice, have gratitude. These are all really nice things, but they don't get to the function of behavior for the student, right? Lots of us have had like peripherally classroom management training, but we haven't really dove into the idea of why behavior happens unless you're busy writing IEPs. Additionally, the challenge with some of these other approaches is that they can be limited in understanding broader cultural competence, frequently can be used to police behavior, and can cause trauma to some of the most vulnerable, and miss addressing some of the very needs we're struggling with right now. True social and emotional learning is rooted in the science of how our brain works. It's strength-based, driven by equity, sensitive to trauma, looks at wellness in a larger sense. It takes into context youth and adults' larger eco-cultural niche. That's the things like our families, our religion, our communities, the things we like to do, right? All of those things that help form who we are, that larger, whether we have a job or children, all of those kinds of things. And it looks at how we understand ourselves and what that means in the context of all of our interactions. Social and emotional learning is not about policing, but about transformation. In this time of collective trauma that some of you have lifted up, isolation and struggle, building social and emotional learning skills can support our mental health and wellness, support the development of a culture of connection, and lead to greater academic success. Now, this should really pique your interest because all of you represent such a diverse landscape of educational needs, from prevention to intervention, locations with multiple cultures, languages, and demographics, students who are on track or struggling, and all of you have educators who are currently in need of some social and emotional learning as well. So let's talk a little more formally about that. And Paul, is there anything that you want to add from our chats? Does this?
No, you mentioned the one thing which I thought was lovely. It's connection before correction. That was a lovely way of phrasing it, I think.
Really, really like that. And I think that person's going to be really happy with some of the data that we show a little bit later on. So what is social and emotional learning? Well, I mentioned CASTLE, or the Collaborative for Academic and Social and Emotional Learning. And they have, if you know about them, have had a definition for over 20 years about sort of the what we should be looking at in terms of social and emotional learning, and we're going to look at their competencies. But the definition evolved in 2020. I'm not sure how many of you knew that. But social and emotional learning from CASEL is defined as the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply their knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. For me, this definition highlights concepts that include the pedagogy of how we learn, the creation of our sense of self and our impact, self-regulation, or the ability to be independent and have autonomy and agency, strength-based approaches like facilitating competency and building relationship-driven environments rooted in connection, equity, and empathy. More than soft skills, SEL incorporates the larger pedagogy of learning, brain science, equity, and environment. So let's talk a little bit about the competencies. So here is the CASEL circle with the 5 competencies of self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, social awareness, and relationship skills. And you can see that it is in the context of this larger surrounding sort of systems piece that really needs to be informed by this. So CASEL reminds us that SEL is more than just a program or a lesson. It's about how teaching and learning happens, right? Not just that set aside piece, but that whole piece. This includes what you teach and the environment in which you learn, and that's represented, like I said, by the blue circles. Social and emotional learning involves cultivating caring, participatory, equitable learning environments and using evidence-based practices that actively involve all students in their social and emotional learning and academic growth. The goal is to prepare students for long-term success in life and to become responsible, caring members of our multicultural society. The most effective way to promote social and emotional learning is to integrate it into every part of a student's daily lives across all of their classrooms during all times of the school day and when they're in their homes and communities. Now, this requires a coordinated systemic approach between leaders, principals, teachers, families, community partners, all of those things. And some schools aren't ready for a full integration, but Edmentum's ready to support you wherever you are. And hopefully this will help with some level setting. So let's break down these competencies a little bit. And I'm going to ask you as we go through these to be reflective in some parts. So after a couple slides, I'm going to ask you again to maybe share some thoughts or see how this is hitting you. Let's start with self-awareness. So self-awareness in the CASEL competencies is defined as the ability to understand one's own emotions, thoughts, and values, and how they influence behavior across contexts. This includes the capacity to recognize one's strengths and limitations with a well-grounded sense of confidence and purpose. It's broken down further into things like identifying emotions, thoughts, and values. And a lot of you said that emotions piece when I asked you for a definition of SEL. It includes helping with accurate self-perception. So, when we think our skills are here, but maybe they're here, or we have a different perception of what's going on with things, really writing that helps in recognizing our strengths, building self-confidence, and self-efficacy. So that's self-awareness. Self-management is the ability to manage one's own emotions, thoughts, and behaviors effectively in different situations, and to achieve the goals and aspirations that you may have. This includes the ability to delay gratification, to manage stress, feel motivation and agency, and to accomplish personal and collective goals. And some of the attributes include impulse control, stress management, self-discipline, self-motivation, goal setting, and organizational skills. I'm sure lots of you, lots of things are sparking for you right now with this list of things. And one of the things I'd like to encourage you to do is think about the definitions of self-management, self-discipline, and self-motivation. Often we use those interchangeably, but they're really different things. So maybe you can think for yourself or pop into chat what the difference is between self-discipline and self-motivation. I also want you to think about where these skills are essential, right? And how you might integrate either the self-awareness piece that we just touched on or self-management into what you are currently doing. So think about that as we keep moving along. And if someone's brave enough to pop in the difference between self-discipline and self-motivation, go for it. There's no wrong answer. This is all about learning. So I want to talk just again about social awareness. Social awareness is the ability to take the perspective and empathize with others, including those from diverse backgrounds, cultures, and contexts. This includes the capacity to feel compassion for others, understand broader historical and social norms for behavior in different settings, and to recognize the family, school, and community resources and supports. And you can see some of the bold language here is where Castle has changed their definition or enhanced their definition. I see someone popped in there. Self-discipline is what we do. Okay, thank you for taking a shot at that. That's awesome. Self-discipline is what keeps us going even without motivation. Great. Self-motivation is focus, right? Okay. Discipline is the ability to manage. Okay, so right. So motivation is the will to do something. I'm either passionate or excited about it. I feel like, you know, there's something driving me, and self-discipline is the ability to execute things. And you can be motivated without self-discipline. You can be highly and maybe not accomplish your goal, and you can have a lot of self-discipline and be totally unmotivated and still not accomplish your goal. So they really need to marry. Thank you for all of you for putting that in there. So let's continue just a bit here with social awareness. Social awareness involves perspective taking, empathy, appreciating diversity, and respect for others. How do some of these qualities fit into what and how you're teaching right now? Think about that, because I want you to be able to apply some of this when you leave, right? One of the beautiful things about trainings is we get all inspired, we get excited about what we're learning, and then we leave and we sort of go like, okay, what do I do with it now? So I'm going to challenge you a little bit to think about that as we go through. So let's talk about relationship skills. Relationship skills are the ability to establish and maintain healthy and supportive relationships and to effectively navigate settings with diverse individuals and groups. This includes the navigation of settings with differing social and cultural demands and opportunities, the ability to provide leadership or seek or offer help when needed. Relationship skills include communication skills, the practice of active listening, collaborative problem solving, negotiation of conflict, cooperation, social engagement, relationship building, and teamwork. All really important things. A final Castle competency is responsible decision making, and that's the ability to make caring and constructive choices about personal behavior and social interactions from across diverse situations. This includes the capacity to consider ethical standards and safety concerns, to evaluate the benefits and consequences of various actions for personal, social, and collective well-being. It's about identifying problems, analyzing situations, solving problems, evaluating, reflecting, and ethical responsibility. So I want you to bear some of these things in mind as I shift us to look at some academic skills that I think we all value. And if any of you are IB schools, you're going to feel like these really resonate with you, but they're really skills that we hope all learners will have, right? We want our learners, our kids, to be inquirers, to be curious about what they're learning, and from a social and emotional lens about themselves and others, right? That's part of the learning process. To be thinkers, which requires ethical decision making, the ability to take others' perspectives and to separate assumptions or stereotypes from fact. To be knowledgeable learners, to understand issues like equity and bias and the desire to learn about other cultures and how their own and other behavior impacts across different contexts. We want our learners to be risk takers, to feel safe enough to approach unfamiliar situations and people, right? That they're clear in their own beliefs and they have the self-confidence to share them. I like to have you think a little bit about the kids in elementary school who are always asking questions. Why, what's going on? How do I, and we tend in our education systems to crush some of that natural curiosity as kids age, right? And so by the time they're in high school, people are much more reticent to raise their hand, or they're worried about failure. And of course, we know that failure can be as much of a learning experience, if not more, than getting the right answer, because you have to explore the whys behind it. So really continuing to cultivate that culture of risk taking. We want our kids and our staff to be communicators, to have active listening skills, that they can express an idea in ways that other can hear them and are confident in navigating difficult conversations. And finally, for today, being principled means understanding your own beliefs and values. So it's that reflective piece. Where do I stand in this? What does it mean? How do I create meaning for what I'm learning? In addition to having respect for the dignity of others, it means managing your own behavior and taking responsibility for your actions. So you can see from this slide that these skills really parallel the social and emotional learning characteristics, right, that we just looked at. And they support both academic and interpersonal success. They also parallel high achieving learning environments, like I mentioned, the IB or the inquiry model. The challenge for us as educators is to begin to call them out for explicit learning by giving students emotional vocabulary, opportunities for personal reflection, skills to understand character traits and all or nothing thinking, or their own awareness of implicit bias, to really evaluate the backpacks that they and we carry that influence the lens through which we see the world, and to understand that these things are formed by experience and exposure, not by character flaws. Additionally, to purposefully build skills around managing stress, increasing coping skills, and understanding the triggers and responses that happen in our own brain that have to be recognized in order to change our patterns of behavior and response. And certainly the pandemic has brought that home for a lot of us, where our coping skills that we used to have weren't working as effectively for us, and we felt more disconnected. Now, we at Edmentum have partnered with Base Education because it gives us a curriculum that creates those safe spaces and gives teachers the ability to interact with students in ways that increase their engagement. Now that we've connected SEL competencies and learner qualities, let's loop back a bit to the pedagogy and brain science behind this. So when you think about the barrier that is most likely to derail someone's use of these skills, right? Someone's compassion, open-mindedness, ability to listen or to make an ethical decision or to separate themselves from assumption. What do you think it is? What do you think derails that? Maybe fear or defensiveness? Pop it in. Yeah, Elena, fear right there. For sure. Other things that you think it might be. Right? Maybe you're thinking about anger or passion, helplessness or insecurity, right? I'm not sure about my answer. I'm not sure about my choice. Vulnerability, yes, Hoda, lack of confidence for sure. Making ourselves vulnerable. Right, absolutely. So a lot of these things that derail learning are emotions, right? They're emotions. We cannot remove emotion from the equation. That's why intentionally teaching social and emotional learning matters. So why is dealing with emotions so hard, and what can you do about it? I want to ask you a question. Okay, have you ever reacted emotionally and regretted it later? Like maybe you got that email and you were all fired up about what it said and you like sent that response off. Maybe it was on some social media, and afterwards you're like, oh, why did I send that? How do I get it back? How do I recall it? Or maybe someone you're working and someone comes to your door and you like snap at them and it's really not about them. It's about whatever's going on in your life. 100%. I see these yeses are coming fast and furious. This is like a universal experience, right? For sure. All right. Well, let's talk about that for a minute. So this is one of my favorite quotes. It's by Mary Helen Immordino Yang. She's a neuroscientist who used to be a teacher. She's in California. And she says, emotions are in essence the rudder that steers thinking. And I want to talk about this for a little bit, right? So when I started teaching 30 plus years ago, it was not uncommon for a teacher to look at a student who was struggling with reading and say, try harder. Focus more, right? Any of you had that experience, right? We didn't understand dyslexia. We didn't understand learning differences in the same way that we do. But what happened is we had a pedagogical shift where we suddenly understood that we needed to retool, that what needed to happen is we didn't want to blame the student. We needed to be a teacher for that student to meet them with what they needed where they were. And that really shifted the pedagogy of how we teach and how kids learn, right? And so we're in that stage again, this new understanding of emotions. And I know lots of you popped that in, and I was so excited to see that, right? The new understanding of emotions and the role of learning brings home the importance of creating psychologically safe environments that help us use our rational brains for peak performance, right? Essentially taking us out of fight, flight, or freeze. That reactive brain, or the downstairs brain, that's the part that helps us attend and focus and creates our schema, the buckets that we have that sort our experiences, right? That reactive brain can disconnect us from the prefrontal cortex, or our rational brain, the part that most of us tend to teach to. And it's important to remember that fight, flight, or freeze, it doesn't just happen when we're faced with wild animals or trauma, but it can happen when our brain is triggered by stress. Danger can mean disappointment, not measuring up, right? Some of those words that you just populated around insecurity and inability to cope. The way to shift this in education is through creating interactions where students feel connected and where it's safe to take risks, and we understand the impact of our own responses on ourselves and others. This kind of environment is based on the fundamental competencies of social and emotional learning and takes the whole learner into account. And the pandemic has only elevated the importance of thinking about the whole learner and realizing that emotions and connections matter, and that it's not one specific population that needs it. It's not those kids, right? Those tier 2 and 3 kids that we used to, put in that category, but it's everyone, all of us, right? So let's go back to that question I just asked you about, have you ever reacted emotionally and regretted it later, that almost 100% of us agreed with, right? I want you to think about this. What did you learn from that experience? Did you take the time to learn from it? How did you handle your disappointment in yourself? What did you do to change your behavior? What skills did you need? Who taught you? What would have happened if you had learned those things sooner? Now, we often rely on skills that we passively, implicitly acquire from our environment and our family. What would change for your students if you explicitly taught them how to handle disappointment in themselves? Would they become greater risk takers? I love someone popped in there, the 24-hour rule. Even if it's a 2-minute rule, it's better because it gives you time to reconnect your brain, right, from that pop-topping experience. What if we gave students the emotional granularity to name what they feel? Would they become better communicators, more caring and reflective, more open-minded to others' needs and struggles, right? There's a big difference between, being sad and feeling helpless, but they're on the same spectrum. We have to really get that granularity broken out. Even better, what if they had a toy box? And I like to call it a toy box instead of a toolbox because it should be fun, right? And of coping skills that allowed them and us to notice early how they're reacting and to manage that emotion before responding. To be able to set goals and follow through with integrity, purpose, and an awareness of their impact on others. That's the ideal, right? Well, these skills, they don't magically appear as we age. We actually have to intentionally and explicitly teach them. Yeah. I'm sure that the chat is really popping. I see it popping now, and I wish I could read it all. Paul, is there anything you want to grab out of there real quick?
Yeah, I mean, Dial has mentioned the importance of art and coping strategies, and one of those would be
Sure.
art. Yeah, we've had fathers told me to count to 10. Now we've had the 24-hour rule, which you alluded to, and growth mindset has been mentioned as well.
Yeah, right. Cultivating it, but really figuring out how to teach the essential skills and what drives behavior, right? Belonging, mastery, independence, they're all important in driving behavior. And we have a really interesting session on understanding behavior and the function of that in order to get to this place we could do sometime too. But let's talk about how we integrate social and emotional learning based on some of those things that you just mentioned. Paul. So I like to, think about tools for us as we sort of pinpoint some of the discussion. And you can see here in this tool, this is sort of a rubric for schools to think about. So you can see on this side, we have the Castle competencies and some questions at every level that we can ask, or some statements that we can observe. So at an administrator level, can I understand and manage my emotions in a way that allows me to create a safe building or district, allowing me to be present for learning and listening to those I need to support, right? Yes, giving more options and less instructions. You're going to like the next slide that I have. From a teacher perspective, can I understand and manage my own emotions in a way that allows me to create a safe classroom and to be present for the learning and listening to needs of students, right? How do we get student voice? One of the things that I talk about is sometimes, because of the demands in our profession, we'll go into a classroom with the task in mind rather than the actual people in front of us. And we have this list of things that we need to accomplish for the day. And we're not, for any malicious reason, really focused on that piece and not really taking in what are the needs of the students in the classroom? How are they feeling? What's going on for them? One of the things that I had some students in an IB presentation in France that joined one of our sessions, and they said that this year for them, actually, the virtual learning had teachers paying more attention to what their needs were in that moment. And that was really fulfilling for them. They felt much more connected because people were actually asking those deep questions. And so what's the learning that we can take from that experience as we move into integrating sort of back into what we're doing now, cultivating connection, right? I see that there. So you can see, and we'll make sure that you have a copy of this with the rubric attached, but really looking systematically, what do we support in our schools? The next one is a really simple technique that I love. It's just simply rephrasing, right? Rephrasing things that come out of our mouths on our default setting. I don't know about you, but do you recognize any of these? Like, stop it, cut it out, try harder, focus, just ignore it. What's wrong? What's wrong with you? What's going on? What's wrong with you? That's the one that you often most say at home more than you say in school, probably, right? When your own child is like doing something and you just look at them and go, what is wrong with you? And my son, when he was growing up, reminded me that was not the best approach because he had seen me do some trainings. But how do we rephrase for connection? And a lot of you have mentioned that connection. Rather than, in one of the schools that I was an administrator, often I would, get to see the kids who were struggling, and they will come in and someone will have said, well, what's going on? What happened there? And they'll go, yeah, I know, I should just ignore it, because that's the phrase that they hear. And my question was always, but can you ignore it? Because if you could, why are you sitting here? So the question from our end, from building that connection, is what's really bothering you? How can I help you? How did it make you feel? And we can do that in literature. When we're reading a book with kids, we can say, what emotions did that author evoke? What is going on with that? And we can really start to connect that to our larger learning. So hopefully you like this simple technique of rephrasing. Yes, building empathy with students. Right, absolutely. So let's talk about why. Why are these things important and what do we know from the research? What I want you to see in this slide is Search Institute, who's someone who for the past 30 years has done research around asset development, right? So some of you may have heard of the 40 developmental assets, and there's research that says the higher students' assets are, the more pro-socially acceptable their behavior is. So they're less likely to behave badly, smoke, steal, do all those things, and they're more likely to be inclusive of others and have a positive attitude and have that growth mindset. So assets really matter. Well, in the past few years, the Search Institute has really drilled down on this concept of relationships that many of you have mentioned, this idea of developmental relationships. And what you can see in this slide is that actually schools do more poorly at facilitating connected developmental relationships than things like out of school programs where kids are really, there's sort of interest driven focus on that social emotional piece. And that this is particularly true as students age. We do much better connecting, right, with those developmental relationships at an elementary age than we do at a high school age. And there's probably lots of reasons for that we can tease out, right, around the sort of natural individuation that's going through and the need to connect with peers and the fact that many kids change classrooms, all those kinds of structural things. But this is a really important piece of information and really affirms what we've known in child development research for years, right? So some of you have probably remembered learning about Erickson's stages of development or Bowlby and Ainsworth's theories of relational attachment. Both of them highlight the importance of parental and relational connection on building trust and the impact of shame and doubt, right? Social science research has supported family connectedness and the pro-social and academic success of youth for years. And now brain science and neurology, like neurology can really map out the fact that this is happening, that our brain really needs to connect wholly in order to learn, and that those relationships make impact in terms of sticky learning. So really, really important stuff. And so what they found is that the higher those developmental relationships, the stronger the kid's GPA, self-perception of academic performance is, and all of those things. So how do we cultivate and measure connection, right? So we might think that we're connected, but really student perception of connection is what matters, right? They could have 10 people in their family. We could say, oh, they have lots of resources, but if they feel disconnected, and we see this a lot, particularly in youth who are struggling with different identity issues, right? That maybe they don't feel heard or understood, even though they may have sort of external perceived resources. That is what matters. Their perception matters. And so one of my favorite ways to measure it is through this DOT project. And I was in a consortium of schools that did this in 22 different districts. And what we did and what you can do is to look at, give students sort of a map of all of the adults in their reference framework, whether it's a virtual folks who they connect with, or whether it's in person, and then you want to include, the secretaries and the folks that they might be touching base with, and ask them to put a dot next to the people they feel connected to. And on the same side, you ask all of the adults in the population to put a dot next to the kids they feel connected to. And then you can de-identify some of that data and map it out and see, like, does my perception, does our sort of corporate perception of where connection is happening reflect what the students are seeing? And what does that mean for the rest of our data, right? So are these kids who are really well connected, like Efren, do they do better in school? Do the kids who don't have any, are they struggling more? Are we trying to figure out how to engage them? Why is that? And how can we then intentionally start to build some connections because we know they're important in places where maybe they are not? So what do you think about this DOT project idea? Pretty cool, right? Yeah, thank you, Mona. I love it. And one of the things that's really nice too, from an administrator perspective, is you can use this for coaching. Like, you can meet with staff and say, you can target resources, you can think about your systems. And then as a staff, I can say, well, how can I build these? And in supervision, I can say, well, maybe my perception about how I connect with kids needs some growth. Really, really cool. All right. So for us, right, more formally, we also encourage using an SEL assessment that measures essential SEL skills, fundamental and learning success. And our baseline assessment is one that aligns nicely with the earlier data that I shared. In addition to being a formative assessment that can be done at different points, it is unique in that it provides a what next course pathway for students. So it takes the skills that they have based on that measure, and it creates a pathway for them along with a developmental pathway. Now you can learn more about this from Paul at another time, but I just want to say that, you know, the idea of having something tangible to measure is really helpful. And just so you can see, because this overlaps really nicely with the data that I just shared with you, one of the things that we've learned from this assessment, right, and this is the 50% of all kids who've taken baseline and kids who fall below or above that, that after the first 90 days of using an SEL program, in this case BASE, school connection grew, particularly because that's fostered by hearing student voices and understanding their responses and what's going on, and building that self-awareness, that as that grew, engagement grew and academic self-confidence grew. And the reason this is really important is this maps on to some of the national data and international data studies that we've been seeing. So kind of cool. And I'm going to just click through this slide for time here. All right. So what can it look like? So here's something that you can think about as you plan your courses. So from an elementary, middle school, high school, you know, a lot of us teach novels, or we have read alouds for kids. And from an elementary perspective, a teacher who's conducting a read aloud of the story, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, right, can assist students in thinking about things like emotions and self-regulation and coping strategies. Kids can build word walls that demonstrate the emotions that are exhibited or the things that they feel when they have challenging experiences like this. And you can really integrate that into literacy and into learning and to building vocabulary, all of those cool things. Many of us also teach books that have really weighty themes in them, right? So in this case, I've used some of the ones that are often in our curriculum. Freak the Mighty, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. They have issues around the impact of families, understanding exploitation, equity, empathy, lots of themes that we unpack, right? And often as teachers, we don't necessarily feel equipped to unpack those in ways that create meaning for students, in ways that make that learning sticky. And so having a good SEL curriculum can help you do that, or also just integrating that into the conversation can make learning more valuable. We can do this in all subjects. You know, math can help students think about creating structured decision-making plans, right? Order of operations and the importance of really being deliberative in those skills can help kids with decision trees and things like that. Science can teach us about how our brain works. And kids really need to know those things. Why am I reacting impulsively? What's going on for me? How come I'm not learning as well today? Why did I give up when I did? How can I create positive points for struggle? So all of those things are really important. So I'm just going to ask you, because I can, to look at this list of courses and think which of these kinds of things would really enrich my students' like experiences and the needs that we're seeing, particularly in the pandemic. So just take a look for a second and see if any of these kinds of themes pop out for you, because this is what social and emotional learning is all about, right? That all or nothing thinking goes into that sort of growth mindset thing that folks have talked about, and you can see that there. Yes, boundaries, really, really important. Thinking about how we navigate those, how to set them, right? Restorative practices, bullying, 100%, anger management, coping strategies, all of these things are so, so important. And they're not just for challenging times, right? How many of our kids, particularly in high performing schools, have had the time to really sit down and be reflective on their future goals or their vision for themselves? Really important. And then also, we need to think about staff and how to create moments for professional development and build skills so that we feel that we're taken care of and that we can then take care of those folks around us. So social and emotional learning is important for us too, and that's a whole nother topic, but I didn't want to leave without saying that. So we do have some resources for you, and we have a couple of minutes here. I know, Paul, you want to wrap it up a little bit, and if there are other questions, we want to be able to address those. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. That was absolutely brilliant, as always. Have we got any questions for Jen? It'd be great if you can pop those in the chat, and I can pose those questions to Jen. We did have one earlier that was related to the cultural variations in social emotional learning settings. Jen, I don't know if you want to pick up on that a little bit.
Yes, I would love to. And I'm actually I'm gonna diminish my screen so that I can just look at folks. So, you know, one of the things that is so important about getting so from a cultural perspective, social and emotional learning from a mental health perspective should come from the internal out, right? Or certainly, you know, in collectivist communities, we're looking at how what is inside of us impacts those around us so that we can be more effective in doing that. So it's not just about sort of building ourselves up, it's about this larger piece. And one of the beautiful things about real social and emotional learning is it has equity and culturally responsive pedagogy at its base, because we're witnessing to the story of the person who's interacting with it. We're looking at what is going on for that student or staff. We're meeting them where they are within our own cultural context, and we're building skills around that story. And so the idea of sort of cultural relevance is driven by the person interacting with it and the community that you're in. So I've presented this kind of stuff to the Inupiaq community in Alaska and really looked at Inupiaq values and how that is intrinsically woven into this kind of experience and in multiple different settings. Character education programs, which start from a place of defining the norm that they're trying to teach, right? So, and a lot of that is used for helping kids meet the expectations externally of the community. And they don't do that internal work that allows students to really tell their story. And as educators, as we're interacting with our students' stories, whether it's through the curriculum that we're already using, like literature or math or science, or whether it's through a social and emotional learning curriculum that you can integrate, right? It should be driven by the voice of the people interacting with it, right? We need a mirror to see our own reflection. We need a window to look at that of others, and we need a sliding door to go in between. And that's what good social and emotional learning curriculum does. So hopefully that touches on the cultural piece.
Yeah, perfect, Jen. Thank you. No other questions have come in so far. Just as a way of sort of wrapping things up, then this is our first sort of formal CPD that we've done with International Accreditation Association. There are plans to do more. When the next session we're going to be looking at is formative and summative assessment, which is going to be on sort of November the 1st. So please keep your eyes and ears out for that. We'll send information out on that. I will send out a recording of this session, okay, with some more links for you to go and investigate further. If there's an interest in digging deeper into social emotional learning, then I'm putting Jen on the spot, but I'm hopeful that that Jen would be willing to do another session for us if there's interest in digging deeper.
I'd love to come back and do understanding behavior and the roots of behavior and how that feeds into our ability to have culturally responsive curriculum and SEL. That'd be great.
That sounds like a fantastic session. Ron, did you want to mention about the CPD certificates that I think we're going to be issuing?
Yes, we will be working with Edmentum to collect those who participated today, and we will be sending out professional development certificates to all of today's participants. So we certainly would like to thank you on the part of both organizations for your participation in the wonderful learning that we all experienced. And I know that we all, certainly by the chat, as I was monitoring that as well during Jen's presentation, how it really resonated with people because it is the foundation, as we saw on the very first slide. It's the roots of what teaching is all about.
Okay, thank you very much, Ron, and thank you once again, Jen, for your continued support with social emotional learning.
Well,
as-
thank
as-
you
as
for
we move-
spending your evenings with me. My goodness.
And thank you, everybody, for attending.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Right.